Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Averill Park Central School District Board of Education meeting on this Monday, March 27, 2023. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'll start with the superintendent.
All right, good evening. Short report since we just met. A couple things to bring to the board's attention. First of all, I want to congratulate our Algonquin Odyssey of Mind teams. Both teams have won their division and are headed off to states. That was breaking news. We wanted to get that in there. The 180-day waiver request per the regulation states that a letter has to be sent by your attorney on behalf of the district. So Jeff has sent that. We expect it to be granted. We have no reason to believe it won't be. We're hoping to get a response ASAP so we can plan accordingly. We actually did just get a response moments ago, but it wasn't clear. So we're looking for clarification on the email. Yeah, so we're gonna wait for the clarification on the response from SED, but we're hoping that gets approved. So good news on the PFOAs. We had our first quarter testing at Algonquin and we met all the requirements. So that is good news there. Our filtration system up and running and performing as we had hoped. And then we thought we'd embarrass Bray, who was just recently named. We'll let you leave if you want. But we had a
celebration. Well, that's certainly the case for an English teacher in the Averill Park Central School District.
But he's not just an English teacher. Bray Engel is someone who truly does it all. I've been like the AP guy for years. I'm the auditorium manager. I drive bus. I've been driving bus for 21 years. I coached 24 seasons in my first 15 years here.
He's a top teacher for a reason.
I'm kind of the resident DJ for the last 25 years. Class advisor, yeah, all kind of club advisors. And I taught everything.
He's known for doing it all.
When do you sleep?
I don't sleep a whole lot. I don't know, I'm just busy all the time.
3 decades of teaching. Bray Engel's answer is simple when asked what keeps him motivated.
I love what I do.
On top of the long list of things Engel does for the Averill Park Central School District, he's also a mentor, helping students find their voice and confidence.
Good morning, Averill Park. This is Katie with WPHD. Today is Tuesday, February 7th, and it's May Day. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
This group of Averill High School students are responsible for the morning announcements. Some of them have had Engel as a teacher, some only spend time with him for announcements. But they all say he's deserving of being a top teacher.
You can't walk 10 feet in the school without seeing something that he's done.
What does that mean to you guys when you see a teacher who's hands-on? You guys probably don't really think about it because he's a teacher, we're supposed to see him, but he has a life outside of you guys too, but he puts so much time into this school. What does that mean to you guys?
I think he's very committed to caring about his students and doing whatever he can for them. And I've never had him as a teacher, but just doing the announcements every day, I've been able to notice how committed he is to being a teacher and being there for his students. And as a student, I really value that.
And though he doesn't get much sleep with his busy schedule, Engel's students say one thing he's always able to fit into his schedule is being there for them.
He really connects with his students. He shows that he knows what you're going through if you're going through a tough time, and he connects with you, he laughs with you, and if needed, he cries with you. Wow.
So congratulations to Bray on that much-deserved recognition.
Thank you.
And we'll follow it up with our celebration of success. So a lot going on in just a couple of weeks. Thanks to Brian for putting together that video again. And that concludes the superintendent's report.
Thank you. That brings us to item number 3, public comment. And this public comment is limited to topics on this evening's agenda. And I just want to remind people that you have 2 minutes to speak. I do have a blue sheet on a topic that's on the agenda. So if you'd like to come, where do you want to put the microphone? Right? Okay, go to the microphone and you can speak. Thank you.
Good evening. For those that don't know me, I'm Colleen Clark Opulans, a Spanish teacher at the high school, finishing up my 23rd year here at Averill Park. As the board discusses this year's budget in this very difficult fiscal time, I hope that our guiding principles are kept in mind, being that the budget is the financial representation of our academic program. With the proposed budget, we are losing 8.5 teachers. I do not know all the effects of these cuts, but I do know that it will eliminate a year of language in the middle school, and our forensics classes in the high school will no longer be offered. While academic programs are being cut, we are adding an administrative position, the Assistant Director of Special Education. Since 2019, when Sharon Lawrence retired, there have been 3 positions added to the district office. And I'm not saying that we don't need these 3 positions. Please understand that, because I do believe that our district office does a good job. And then teachers are being told that our numbers are going down, student numbers are going down, and we need to cut programs because of the budget. But the administration is being added too. And I think we need to look on whether there are other places that we can make cuts in order to keep as many teachers as possible in front of our students. Our goal should be to maintain strong academic programs and to keep as many teaching positions as possible, the ones that have the direct contact with our students. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. I will also encourage you folks to go to your state legislature and tell them to put the hold harmless at the rate of inflation and not far less than the rate of inflation.
And I have done it.
Good, thank you. I think, anything that we can get there is great, so thank you. Okay, it brings us to item number 4, to approve the minutes of the March 13th, 2023 meeting. Megan makes motion, Doug seconds, discussion. All those in favor? Passes unanimously, thank you. And then if I could have a motion to approve items number 5, 6, and 7, the consent agendas for business, personnel, and special ed. Ann makes the motion, Doug seconds, discussion. Adam.
So this is probably a bit of a rookie question, but 5I through DD are like this whole pile of health and welfare contracts with other neighboring school districts. I don't know, Jim or Jesse, could you please sort of briefly summarize what these are for and how these fees are calculated?
I'll have Carrie do it. She's a little bit closer to that.
Sure. So when students attend private schools, their district of residence is still responsible for health and welfare services if another public school provides them. So in our case, districts who send students to Parker School, we do provide health and welfare services. We actually have a nurse over there. So we then bill back the public schools where those students reside for those services. So, and it's the flip-flop for our students who attend private schools.
LaSalle,
And
yeah.
right, LaSalle, we have a number of them that we pay for. So that's really what these contracts are for. The way we calculate them is we look at our budget for nursing, social worker, psychologists, and we come up with the rate and we divide it by the number of pupils that attend both Averill Park and the Parker School to come up with the per pupil allocation. So that's how we come up with the cost for those.
Cool, thank you.
You're welcome. And just, I feel like we answered this question for me before, but to get it in here. What we're approving tonight by and large, if I'm not mistaken, this is incoming, right? This is incoming funds for us.
Right, so the ones on the agenda tonight, but in the past couple agendas, we've had the outgoing funds being approved. So this time of year is when all the contracts go back and forth between the school districts, but these are for our revenue, right?
Great, thanks. And
We're including number 6 here, right?
correct.
I want to congratulate Matt on tenure. Well earned, well deserved.
Yeah.
I was very happy to read that as well as the recommendation, and I'm so happy for you. It's you've worked really hard and made a lot of data-driven decisions, which is one of our goals. So really appreciate all the hard work you do, and it's well deserved to you.
I also want to say it is my pleasure to be approving Matt for tenure tonight. I think he's done a lot in terms of using his data expertise, but also the learning teams to keep the focus on every student every day. Make sure the curriculum is aligned and all that other, and actually being here presenting curriculum stuff, which we haven't always had in the past just due to other circumstances, but we appreciate that. Thank you. Any other discussion? Okay. So I'll call it to a vote. All those in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you. Then that brings us to the action items, which we have several here tonight. And the first one would a motion to approve the school district calendar revised for the 22-23 school year. Again, Adam makes a motion. Megan seconds. Discussion. Do you want to just quick note the change?
Sure, just simple changes. We do this every year. Usually wait till the snow days are over. This year, not sure when that'll be. Officially, it's over, I guess. So we'll have 2 half days at the end of the year. Those are key, and we do those for our celebrations and our time for teachers to close up rooms, and we do all sorts of stuff with promotion retention meetings and elementary class lists. There's a whole bunch of work that gets done during those half days. So we usually have 1, 2, kind of depends on the year, but that is the change to this year's calendar, hopefully the last of many official changes.
Any questions, discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Passes unanimously, thank you. The second one is to approve the TSM Fund Scholar Memorial Award in the amount of $500 to an Averill Park High School senior graduating in the 22-23 school year and entering college. This award is a 1-year award. Megan makes a motion and seconds. Discussion? Go ahead.
Is it worth TSM?
Yeah.
Can we?
Yeah.
Is it the full name or it's TSM?
Well, that's the name of the scholar.
Okay.
That's fun, but we can thank his family
Yes,
for
let's do that.
doing.
That's what I want.
Okay, go ahead, do that.
No, you do that.
No, it's okay. Okay, well, we want to thank the family of Tyler McIntyre for putting this to, offering this up for one of our high school seniors as they move on, so. All right, we'll call that one to a vote. All those in favor? Passes unanimously. The next one is to approve the agreement between the district and Rensselaer County regarding the Rensselaer County Department of Mental Health Clinic satellite to be hosted at Averill Park High School. And seconded by Megan. Discussion? Thank you guys for your good work for bringing that here.
And this is again, just for those, it's a formalization of, or expansion of the arrangement we currently have at the middle school. We have students in both buildings that are being served, so this just make it a little more efficient and use the time wisely, so we're going through the process for the county. We thank them for their partnership. Again, the mental health clinic in Algonquin, it was established before I came back, and I believe we were the first one, be quarterback in the county to have that. So we've been on the kind of forefront of this and just kind of continue this expansion. So.
I was looking into this when it came on the agenda. There's it's like another example of where you guys are ahead of the curve. And from a data standpoint, there's research out there now that if you look that stuff up, having those services on site makes a big difference in their stories to be able to study that. And so thank you guys for being on, right? There's a name for being at the front of the thing. I don't know what it is. It's a TED Talk. Winner. What's that? Winner. But like there's to be ahead of the curve. There's a name. You can probably look that up too. But yeah, it's when I kind of looked into that's where it's progressing. And so thanks.
Anything else? Okay, we'll call the vote. All those in favor? Aye. Thank you. Passes unanimously. The next item is to approve a memorandum of agreement by and between CSEA and the Averill Park Central School District regarding recognizing the commitment and dedication of staff members who worked during extreme weather conditions on March 14th, 2023. Megan makes a motion, Samantha seconds. Discussion? Megan?
I just want to express our gratitude to our grounds and facilities folks. They show up and they really show up. I mean, we've had an excessive number of extreme weather events over the past couple of years, flooding, and it's kind of ridiculous. Mother Nature is just punishing us. So I really appreciate them, putting in so much extra time and effort to, keep things up and running, and, everything that they do, it doesn't go unnoticed. So thank you.
That's right. I agree. Yeah, thanks to all of them. So with that, shall we approve? All those in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you. And then the last action item is to approve a memorandum of agreement by and between Averill Park Central School District and St. Jude the Apostle School. Do I have a motion? Sam, seconded by Megan. This is for UPK. Any discussion? Yes, me too.
Well, if anyone out there is listening and you have the capacity, we have the kids. So more.
Sorry. So thanks. All those in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you. And we also have a couple resolutions. The first resolution is to approve the capital reserve fund proposition as it is in the attachment to the agenda.
Motion.
Yes, Doug makes motion, Megan seconds. Any discussion on this one?
Could we just have somebody explain to the public?
Yeah, definitely.
I'll give it the first shot. So we talked about this a little bit during the process. The capital reserve fund, we have not had one here, but the goal is to be able to take money that's not a tax increase, it's not a levy increase of any kind, but a way to put funds left over, fund balance, into different existing funds right now. This would be another one, and this would go solely to the future capital project in an effort to pay that down. So kind of the best analogy is when you buy a house, the more money you have down, put down on a house, the less you're going to pay in interest. This is just a way for us to do the same thing. We're going to need to do another capital project eventually. When we put that project out, it'd be nice to have money aside that we can put down that would lower the impact on the taxpayers. So that's the thought here. Very standard, most districts have them. And in fact, when you see in other districts, you see capital projects that go out, you'll see like they're doing, a $30 million project, and they'll have usually it's big bolded underlined text at no cost to the taxpayer. It's partly because of the reserve fund. It's debt service coming off, but it's also being able to put money from your capital reserve into to lower that. So just trying to plan ahead and give ourselves that option going forward to be able to put some money in there. Did I hit all the feel free to?
Yeah, the only thing I'd add is when we propose to spend from the capital reserves, the voters also have to approve that. So once we put this money in there, we can't use that willy-nilly for capital projects. We also have to get the voters' approval to spend it. So there's some safeguards in place for the voters as well.
Any questions?
How much would be put in each year, let's say, in the future, if you have a spreadsheet or something to project for the next couple of years? Right?
don't have a specific amount, because we're not budgeting for the capital reserve. There's on a budget line that's, transfer to capital reserve. So it's really the funds that we have left over at the end of the year. So it'll vary on a year by year basis, depending on how the year goes. A couple of years ago, when we had the flood project, probably nothing would have went in. This year, we'll probably, if it gets approved, we'll put some funds in there. So I think it varies depending upon what happens within the district in a given year.
So in other words, your skill at conserving the money throughout the school year can be put into this fund to help the taxpayers as we go into a capital project in the future.
Right.
That's the way I put it.
Is there any other questions or discussion? Okay, we'll bring that one to a vote. All those in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you. The second resolution is to approve the vehicle purpose proposition, and this is to really just use the bus proposition, put it out to the voters. It's like this simple language.
That's exactly, we do it every year. We've done the test, we just moved it in time.
Can I have a motion?
Oh.
Megan makes a motion and seconds, discussions. Okay, now it's your turn.
I'm just so excited to talk about bus proposition. We do this every year, we just move that timeline up a little bit this year to meet the legal notice requirements. So we'll just be getting that out there. We'll have more information coming in terms of the exact numbers. It's been in the past presentations, it's not in today's presentation, but it'll be consistent with what we've been looking to do.
And this is just continue with our 10-year replacement plan.
Yep.
Okay. Then next year, we should really think about adding maybe an electric bus to it. I mean, that's for the future, but just sort of test the grounds if we're going to be mandated to do it. So, all right. Adam,
And this is largely, we get reimbursed from the state for a lot of this, do we?
it's 70% on transportation.
Yeah, so the buses that are in the proposition, we do get transportation aid on, but the O&M vehicles that we're also proposing, we will not get aid back on, just the transportation of the buses.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. I just wanted to add, it's my understanding that we are on this 10-year cycle because as debt drops off for the older vehicles, we bring on new debt. So there's very little, with the fact that we get reimbursed the 70-some-odd% as well, there's so little impact to the taxpayers that it's just, I just wanted to talk about the debt drop off, and that's a piece of it too, right?
Yeah, so currently, buses are financed over 5 years, so once you have the full 5 years of principal and interest payment, as the debt drops off, you bring on a new purchase. So we are in a rotating cycle now, where we have 5 years of debt payments for buses. So like you said, it's a minimal impact, you have debt dropping off and then debt coming on.
Good question.
The question, or I should say clarification that I was gonna ask is, in the budget newsletter that goes out, these things are all fully, declared, so the split between the buses versus the OEM vehicles that we're requesting, that's all gonna be outlined in the budget proposal, correct?
Yes.
Any other questions, discussion? Okay, we'll call that to a vote. All those in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you. And the last resolution is to approve, upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools, award the plumbing contract for phase 1A of the capital project as it is laid out in the detailed agenda. We're gonna look at the whole thing. Megan makes a motion, Doug seconds. Discussion?
I'll let Carrie handle this one. I won't play the waters.
So we had our bids for the capital projects a couple weeks ago, the last board, or 2 board meetings ago, they were awarded. There was one solicitation that we did not get any bids on, which was the plumbing contract for phase 1B, I think it is. In conversations with our attorney, he said, since we've gone through the process and we've been diligent about trying to receive bids, since we didn't receive any, we can discuss with the contractor who won the bid for the different part of the work to negotiate this work into their contract. So that is what we did. So look at TM McGilligan is doing a different part of the project, so we just added this on to their contract essentially.
Okay, so what I read is maybe I didn't tell you. So that the number that was in here, is that the total number for the, or is that the added amount for the plumbing?
Just the added amount for the plumbing. Yeah, the initial board, I think we're at the second meeting in February has the rest of the boards
Yeah,
there.
that makes sense. Thank you.
Good, thanks for the clarification.
I just want to add in, Tony Armlin, our representative, has been doing a great job with, the entire process and the bid process and all of that. I think he's been representing us extremely well, so.
Agreed.
Any further questions or discussion?
Oh, sorry. From the way that it was worded, it seems like this isn't an entirely uncommon thing to have where you put out a request for bids and don't get any. I mean, that's certainly been my experience personally lately. But like, is that fairly common, or do we see like that as a trend, like in terms of the trades and stuff? Like, are there just like less plumber? Like, do we have any sense, or is it normal enough that it's like a teeny little blip?
Done. Good enough.
I was just thinking, most probably it depends on the trade. Plumbing trade is one that is in high demand, especially projects like this. But
From my understanding, in addition to that, it depends also the bidding climate out there. Are there other large projects in our area that might have larger plumbing contracts than this one? So it really fluctuates. I don't know if there's one particular reason, but I think that all kind of plays into it.
And I like this contractor when we first awarded the contract, because I think this is the one where he has some local people employed.
He is local.
It's just,
Yeah, he's also the contractor that installed the PFOA system at Algonquin, so we have some experience with him, and we've been happy with his work so far.
That's great. Thank you.
That's a nice little tidbit too, though. That makes that just good work. It's good. It's good. Megan, did you have something?
I was just gonna say, in my experience, even in my field, we had, there was a variety of projects that were put off for an extended period of time due to pandemic. And then when they started opening things up again, there just seemed to be a huge influx of projects. So to back up, carry on what she said, some projects may be a larger, bid available, and there are fewer contractors available for that particular type of work, so.
Any other questions, discussion? All right, all those in favor? Passes unanimously, thank you. That brings us to number 10, our presentation for tonight. Matt's gonna kick us off.
So we're presenting,
Just realized, I can talk loud, right?
So presenting tonight on accountability status. This has been kind of a long time coming, both in terms of this year and really over multiple years. Accountability is something that the state has a system in place for. However, in March of 2020, things changed. The state, as was no state in the United States, required to provide any accountability status to the federal government in 2020. In 2020, 2021, New York filed for a waiver from the federal government and it was granted. So there was no accountability for 2 years. Last year, they filed for another waiver and it was denied. So last year is the first year that we've had accountability in 3 years. But it's been a long time coming, which I'll get into in the presentation in terms of why I'm presenting to you in March for tests that were done almost a year ago. So I'll give you the update as to why that happened. Essentially, it's been about a 10-month process to get to accountability. It's in the short history of this version of accountability, it's been a lot quicker. Usually we get our accountability status in the fall. However, because of the change in their process, the results have been a little delayed.
So if you kind of go through the timeline, last year around this time, we had student assessments beginning in the 3rd through 8th grade with the ELA and math assessments. Those were taken in March and April of last year. And then as part of the accountability, we also have our high school exams, which are our Regents exams, which were given for the first time in 2 years last year as well. Those all get played into how our accountability status gets determined by the state. We get those results fairly quickly, actually. We get our Regents results within days, and we get our state assessment results sometime over the summer, anywhere from late July to August. So we had an idea of how we did here locally. The problem is when you get just your scores, you don't really know, well, is it good or is it not good? How did other schools, you don't get any of that. You just get your scores. What we can do is we can look at how our students did by question or standard, and that's the type of assessment we can do with some of the data systems that have been built out. I'll point out that a lot of this accountability work gets worked on by Kristen Card and Doug Kramer, or from our data team. So they put together a lot of reports and dashboards that our teachers can use over the summer to see how the students did by question or by standard on those assessments. Again, it's a start, but it really doesn't give you the full picture. In the fall, we get comparative data. That's where we get a release from how other schools did. So we get all the schools in New York State for the 3-8 assessments, and this year for the first time, we got all the Regent scores from New York State as well. So we could then look at how did Averill Park do for schools in suburban council, for schools in our area of similar size, and that starts to give you a little bit of a picture of how did we do? Always that question, how did we do? The problem is it still doesn't tell us, does the state think we did okay? So we could all have done really well, or we could all have done very poorly. We don't know until we get our accountability status. And that didn't come until January. So finally in January, the school was given the accountability status. It was embargoed for 2 months, so we couldn't talk about it publicly. Finally, this month, they allowed us to publicly talk about our status, and I'll get to it in a few slides, but I'm gonna make you wait. Let me talk a little bit about the restart. This is a big deal. The state has had a plan through the Every Student Succeeds Act. It's part of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. It is required by the federal government that they have an accountability plan. Without having the ability to use assessments for the past 2 years, a lot of the systems and processes that were in place for the state's plan really were unusable. There's things like long-term goals and measurements of interim progress called MIPS. Those are like checkpoints every year that schools have to hit. Well, the problem is when you don't have assessments, you no longer have those checkpoints in place. And you can't have growth if there's nothing to compare the prior year to. So their system really fell apart. So they had to rebuild it. So this year they came out with a new plan that was simply based on last year's results. So MIPS and growth aren't part of the accountability plan this year. So it is a 1-year model based solely on the 21-22 school year results. There are changes to indicators, which I'll get into in just a couple minutes. They've had to suspend, modify, and create indicators. So it's completely different in some cases than what we've had in the past. They've changed the identification labels, how they identify schools, kind of that rating that you get at the end. They've changed that as well. So this is all part of their restart. Actually, Dr. Ferracini and I attended something at Questar on Friday from a rep from State Ed was explaining the restart. And this is just a restart. They're actually looking at a rebuild now because the system, again, really kind of fell apart. They've had to restart it because they have to. They're required for federal accountability, but they actually want to try to rebuild it and do something different with it. So we're waiting to see what that might look like. She wouldn't give us any clues yet. And really kind of taking her words from Friday, they're shifting the narrative. This has been a push. I've seen this beyond just accountability. I've seen it with some of the federal grants that we work with. They're moving away from being punitive to more of a supportive model. And they're trying to shift that narrative. So they're really going to be focusing on timely and meaningful support, both fiscally and programmatically. They've adjusted the language around accountability, specifically the negative connotations and identities that have been attached to schools. And I think the underline in that last paragraph is important. These efforts are identified for schools, not trying to define schools as something. So you'll see in the next slide that you're not identified as a school in need of support, but rather you're identified as a school that is going to have support provided for them. So again, trying to shift it to more of a positive focus when you get identified. So these are the labels. The newest label is the one to the far left. In the past, if you met all your accountability requirements, you were in good standing. And that's probably what, if you've been on the board, you've seen that presented in the past, if you were in good standing. The problem, as the state described to us on Friday, if you identify a bunch of schools in good standing, what does the opposite of that mean? It means you're on the bad list. And they don't want anyone to feel like just because you're not in good standing, you've done something wrong or you're bad. So instead, what they're saying is all 4 levels, no matter how you're identified, there's some level of support. You want to keep improving. So instead of good standing, you'll now be identified for local support and improvement. All right, so that's something that you just do locally. Keep doing what you've been doing, keep improving, no regulatory requirements. The next level down is TSI. That's schools identified for targeted support and improvement. That typically gets labeled when you have subgroups, which I'll talk about in a future slide, when you have subgroups that don't meet certain criteria. So your district as a whole is doing okay, but you have some subgroups. Specifically, it could be your students with disabilities or your economically disadvantaged subgroups. If they're struggling in one of their indicators, you could get identified as a TSI school or district. And in that case, there would be some funding available for support. Again, the state is trying to shift that narrative to supporting. And there would also be actually, in this case, there would not be a plan required. That would be for an ATSI. So no plan, but you would be able to get support, a little more added support than what you would get as an LSI school. And then further down, groups that historically we've not had to worry about here at Averill Park, which would be a ATSI. That's when you have entire schools targeted for support beyond just the subgroups. That's your entire population. And a CSI is a school identified for comprehensive support improvement. That's automatically dictated by the state. They take the lowest 5% performing schools. They get identified as a CSI. They have to have a graduation rate of less than 67%. So obviously not something that we are terribly concerned with in Averill Park, but just wanted to kind of show you the breadth of these identifications. The way that we get measured for accountability is through our subgroups. There are 10 subgroups that the state can report on. The way that subgroups get reported on is when the N size, so the number of students, is greater than 30. In our case here at Averill Park, as a district and all of our schools, so Averill Park Central School District, the high school, the middle school, and the 3 elementaries, have 4 subgroups that have historically, and including last year, received an accountability status on. So that's all of our students, our white students, our students with disabilities, and our economically disadvantaged students. Also at the elementary middle school level, which gets grouped together, there is accountability for our Hispanic population and our multiracial population this past year. And in terms of what they measure with those subgroups, again, I mentioned they've shifted this year. Typically, what you see up in front of you are all the categories in the old model. So every year, the elementary middle school would have accountability measured in achievement level, so how the students did on that 1 year for that assessment, student growth level, how they improved from the prior year to the next year. Then they would combine those 2 things together and get a measurement. They would measure your English language learners and how proficient they were, regardless of whether or not the N size was big enough. So even though we have less than 30 students, we still get an accountability measure as part of our calculation. They would take the average ELA and math academic progress level, so that's kind of combining the growth and the achievement together, and chronic absenteeism. They look at our absenteeism rate. Similar in the high school, those same measurements, but they also add in graduation rate for our 4th, 5th, and 6th year grads, as well as college, career, and civic readiness. That's our students that do things like they take advanced courses, graduate with Regents diplomas, advanced Regents diplomas. They take all that in there and they generate a number from that. So these have been the things that we have been measured on in the past. The changes this year, I kind of grade them out, is they reduced a lot of categories. Obviously, they could not do things that required to show growth or progress. So anything, as I mentioned before, those MIPS, anything that had MIPS tied to it, measures of interim progress, they could not include in the calculation this year. So they were taken right out of that. So less categories to focus on. One of the things that I'll point out in this section is that there's a federal mandate for 95% participation. if you talk about students that have to test, right, the opt-out movement, the federal government has never swayed from 95%. So the state is still required for schools to deliver on that 95% participation. So what they did this year is they had a category that said of all the kids who tested, what was that score, and then all the kids in the cohort. So obviously, the ones that you basically just take the numbers of 2s, 3s, and 4s and divide it against the ones that were testing. That gets you a much better number than dividing against the ones who tested or not tested. So they took those two numbers and brought them together to try to get a truer number. The reality is they can't avoid doing that. She made a point of on Friday saying that's a federal requirement the state has to follow. So they still had to in their calculation, even though there was a lot of things going on still last year, they had to come up with a way to account for that 95%. So they created this other thing about only measuring the ones that took the test as well, and they brought those two numbers together. So those are all the metrics, and ultimately, what it led to, save the best for last, is that we are considered an LSI across the district. So we are only, again, the old recognition was a good standing. We are now considered an LSI. So that's a good thing. We have local continuous support in all of those buildings and across the district, and that's within not just all students, but all the subgroups as well. So our performance last year dictated this standing, and we feel like we're in a good place. We look at all the metrics. There's pages and pages of spreadsheets so that we actually can break it down to subgroup in a building and see and make sure that there's no areas that we have to be concerned with. They do label some subgroups as a potential area for targeted support. We didn't even have any of those as well. So we're in good shape from an accountability standpoint. And that is a quick recap on accountability. Any questions?
Doug has one.
Yes, Doug.
I'll ask another question I think I know the answer to already, but I think it would make it even, what you just said, even more valuable for the public. And that is, the value of data is when you're able to apply it to a specific area for the purpose of improving student scores.
Mm-hmm.
The data that it's nice that we compare our gross scores to other school districts. Are we able to, as teachers, able to drill down into the scores and determine what standards maybe we're weak at and how to improve? For example, let's say a math teacher should be able to, from this data, gather information that we're not doing well with metric measurement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, that's the real value when now we're able to target that as an improvement in our curriculum,
yeah,
what we're teaching. So is that possible?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the type of, I talked about that data that was available right away. We can produce that over the summer. So we can actually look at how students did on a specific question and then what standard that question was tied to. We also created a visualization, allowed us to look at 2019 versus 22. That was the last year that we did a Regents to see how did we do on that standard, how are we doing 3 years later. So there's a lot of ability to dig into questions, standards. We could also look at our gap between how our students did here versus how all the kids in a particular BOCES did, or the particular RIC, which is the entire Northeast region of New York State. So yeah, a lot of being able to dig in to see where our strengths and weaknesses are based on standards and questions and not just other schools.
Perfect, thank you.
Sure.
Matt, it's budget season, so all I heard was no additional funding. Actually, no, nice job. Because you're a data guy, as I am, really important part of data is benchmarking yourself against, I would say, other companies in the industry, but other school districts and learning environments. So coming back with a good benchmark like this is really very affirming of our program. So thank you for sharing the data.
Thank you.
I had a question related to the timing. You had mentioned that there was a 2-month period where you weren't allowed to discuss it with us. Are you allowed to tell us why that is now? And
it's pretty typical for the state. They'll release results to the school. Even all the other things that I mentioned throughout the year, we get them for a period of time before the state will allow for a public release. That's standard form. I think it's probably an error time. So if we ever discovered something, we could go back to them and say, this isn't right. So there's usually a window of time where we get the scores, but we can't publicly talk about it.
So, and for the purposes of clarification, it appears that in their, I find the irony of this state ed touting accountability, but just in the terms of the naming conventions, rather than it sounding punitive, that it basically now identifies all districts noted for some form of support. So rather than being in good standing, where it would be easy for the public to understand that we're meeting these parameters, now it's impossible for anyone in the public to understand what district is meeting any parameters?
I don't know if I can answer that, Megan.
That's how I'm taking it as a lay person. It is now impossible for those of us who don't have a master's degree to understand what any of this.
The key word in our identification is local support, so that, you know, the other ones that imply a level of state support, this is entirely local. So it's you're doing a great job, keep it up, but don't keep shooting for higher. It's essentially what they're doing by giving us an LSI status.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Good job.
So to Doug's point and sort of to Megan's point, so what are we doing to enhance that local support? What is your plan?
Yeah.
I know it's not like.
Well, it's ultimately the same practices we've been doing, right? So it's a little bit what you just talked about before about doing some of the PLC work and really digging into our essential standards and looking at our common formative assessments to make sure we're measuring the right things and that we're looking at our results when we get them back in the summer and say, okay, what are the standards we're strong at? Did we realize how important those standards are to the state? Because locally we thought it was these standards. So it's that kind of work that it's been going on anyways, right? So we just continue it. We're trying to refine it a little bit, but it's certainly, we're not satisfied. We'll keep moving forward. And there's certainly areas that we can see just within our local results, even though the state says we're fine, that we still want to improve on.
Great. Well, that's the answer I want to hear, that you're continuing to look forward
Yep.
and how can we improve? But, which I knew the answer. Anyway, because you guys always do a great job, and I so appreciate this administration because they don't sit back and go, phew, we had an LSI, whatever that means, you know, so we're good. No, we still need to, there's always room for improvement no matter what we do, so I appreciate that a whole bunch.
CSD. You get it up.
That's
the best we can get is LSI.
Oh,
See, this is
yes.
what I'm talking about.
I got something, Megan.
Yeah. But I think that's, you know, it's good news for us, for sure, and I'm glad to hear that we're still looking forward and trying to do better. I mean, you can't do a better rating, but then it's good to keep our students in mind and how can we make sure they're meeting all the standards.
Well, and so just to, I totally, we're all pretty familiar with how I feel about acronyms. And so now I'm looking at just like, I feel you. And so if somebody was to ask me, would it be an appropriate sort of response to say, it's really the level of outside intervention that it would be warranted to help get a given school district up to standard. And so if you, like, good standing, whatever you want to call it, where we are, is the upshot is that we have standing such that we do not need external intervention. And there are gradations along the spectrum of schools that need ever increasing levels of external intervention.
Yep.
Is that?
Yeah,
Is that
it's a fair way to say it.
So if I had to explain that to somebody in Hannaford, I'm taking it right. Although, yeah, I heard the other schools getting funding and all that. Standards are not. Oh, and just to clarify one thing, there's accountability with a capital A, which is what this is, and then there's a lowercase a accountability. So when you say there hasn't been accountability for 3 years.
Yes, state level
Just
accountability.
so that everybody's clear, like, so someone doesn't,
Yeah.
you know, take that little video clip and says, say, what the, well, because it's like, you know, that one sentence, right, could be taken, like, there hasn't been accountability for 3 years. We have accountability for 3 years. This, what he's reporting on right now, is capital A accountability that is a system from SED of determining. And just use it. Oh, God, it's an acronym. But yeah, so that's, it's just,
Correct.
again, if anybody's listening, there's
State
capital A
accountability.
accountability, and there has always been little a accountability from all you guys,
Correct.
for which we are very grateful.
Yeah, I just have like a comment and a question. So just to make sure I know what's going on, because this is kind of a lot, but I think I'm getting it. So it seems like this report is both a blessing and a disguise, because we're where we need to be, but we don't get any funding, is that right?
Yeah, I mean, that's I think that's a fair way of putting it as well. We're not entitled to funding with an LSI. Typically, the funding doesn't start opening up until you get to a TSI or below. Yeah. But now the state will tell you that there are non-funding support that they can provide, and that's what, again, that's shifting the narrative. So I talked a little bit about that. They have a plethora of resources that we can freely access. So we're certainly contributing to that too.
Okay, thanks.
But that funding is pretty specific, right?
Right.
It's
Sure.
not like, oh, you can go.
No,
but
yeah,
it's
no,
like,
it's-
here is
yeah.
what you're.
And as we know, you don't really want to willingly invite the state in if you don't have to that. So I think it would be nice, it would come with strings and there would be a plan and you'd have to use the money for that plan. And again, it's nice to have and it's great for schools that need that level of support. But if you're doing a good job, it's probably best not to open that door if you don't have to.
Thank you.
And I was gonna, I would rather have the students performing at the level they're at and forego whatever, to be in a situation where we have an ATSI kind of level issues, like that's worrisome, that would be worrisome. As a parent, as a teacher, it's a more challenging school environment. And we have what I would consider a healthy, productive school environment, so I go us.
I was just gonna say, you guys continue to do a great job. I am grateful for that. I think any interaction with SED is, I don't have a nice word for it that I can say in public. So thank you for continuing to do a good job, because with that additional funding for the extra help comes a whole other rigmarole of people hell-bent on paycheck justification, and it's not as much help as it appears to be, so. My opinion continues to be.
Okay. Thank you, Matt. That was good news.
Yes,
Nice
good
to
job.
hear that delivered.
I'm sorry, can you send us those slides?
I think they're on the.
Or did you?
Yeah, I think we did this afternoon.
Oh, very nice.
All right, thank you, Matt. So we'll move from accountability to budget. So just reviewing the process for the board, we started off with the non-instructional asks and wants, moved to do instructional, then talked a little bit more about the numbers. And then the last meeting, we presented the superintendent's budget to the board. And then this year, we built in this one extra meeting in the schedule to devote to just discussion. So we wanted to provide for you sort of a higher level, hopefully simpler format to kind of follow, not quite as much in the weeds. That will hopefully give you a jumping off point to start a discussion for tonight's meeting, which leads to the budget adoption, which is scheduled for the next one. So as always, we want to start with our 3 goals and our mission statement, keeping this at the front of what we're trying to do here. You know these well, I will read them too. Moving on to our guiding principles, which are now in year 6, which again, we've talked about multiple times, but we like to keep them in the presentation because they are what we are trying to do to guide and lead us through this process. So if you go back to where we started from, the current year, 22-23, a budget of about $63.8 million is where we left off. Then we came to this year, and what we wanted to provide you with was just some general categories of our significant expense increases. This is not the line-by-line budget. You have access to that. It's many, 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 many lines. This is kind of rounded off general categories that we came up with, just to give you an idea of where the expense pressure is coming from. So contractual salary obligations, as we've talked about, no secret that education is a person business, a people business. About 80% of our budget is tied up in salaries, and that's going to be a big personnel issue item. So those are contractual obligations, those are collectively bargained contracts. Health insurance, always a main driver. That's a combination of the prescription and the health. So again, that's part of that 80% there. You're starting to talk about salary and benefits. We are bringing money over from stimulus funds. Again, as we've talked about, there are two funding streams on the stimulus side. One ends at the end of this year, one ends at the end of next year. So as we talked about going back to last year's presentations, we wanted to start to bring things in that we felt we needed. That number brings us around 309,000. We have some new special education FTE that brought us in some more expenses. Those are need-driven requirements. We talked through that a bit, the 1211 program, if you remember, about trying to keep our kids in-house when possible. Our out-of-district placements, the opposite of starting those 1211 type programs is sending more kids out. So looking at what we have right now and kind of forecasting where we will be, we're budgeting an increase there of about 210,000. And that number, like all of these numbers, is extremely fluid. Literally during this process, I think that number changed probably 2 or 3 times. Family moved in, a family might not move in. It's just constantly changing, right, with these things. We're projecting an increase in our legal fees due to some ongoing litigation. The overtime number, we're trying to budget for appropriately. We've talked about our building and grounds department specifically being understaffed. So the only way to get that work done is often through overtime. We talked a little bit about stuff like the flood or some of the projects that we are doing, the snow removal. That's all overtime, and we are short people. As we've tried to ramp that up, we added someone, an FTE last year. We still have to pay for that work to be done. And of course, they do great work and deserve the compensation for when they're here. On the expense increases, as we continue to go through this, just like everyone at home, our utilities continue to go up. So we're trying to budget appropriately for that. We've had to increase our budget number for substitutes as we try to make sure we're right-sizing how much we're spending there and the increase that we're seeing. Our retirement systems, that's a combination of ERS and TRS, the 2 retirement systems that the district is obligated to pay into. The extended school year program is our summer program focused on our students with special needs. That's going to have an increase. Going back to the payroll side, a little increase with the FICA and Medicare, but still an increase. And then the slide is increases. The next number, the debt service, is actually listed as a decrease. So as we've talked about with our capital projects, right? Projects get funded. You're making debt service payments on those. As they come off the books, that's a savings. So that was one of our capital projects phasing out of our expense side. So it really amounts to sort of a savings of about $757,000. So that is money we're paying in 22, 23 towards a capital project payoff that'll be zeroed out, essentially. So when you look at the expense increases, again, not dollar for dollar, rounded numbers, not every line of the budget, tried to categorize them so we got to the bigger numbers to give you an idea of the main drivers, trying to keep it a little more higher level. You're looking at about a $2.3 million expense side increase. Percentage-wise, about 3.7%. So then you look at the revenue increases. We do have other revenue sources besides what we're going to talk about on this slide, right? But the main ones are state aid and the tax levy. So looking at state aid, our foundation aid, and we've talked a lot about that, we received a 3% increase. That is the hold harmless amount from the state. That's the number that we've been trying to advocate for in an attempt to get that higher. Increase there is $521,298. So you know exactly what that is, right? However, the total state aid is not that. So we have building aid, which is what it sounds like. It's aid from the state for building projects. We had the flood. We paid for the flood. Next year, we got the aid on the flood. That was last year. So that was an increase in our revenue, kind of artificial or kind of inflated, if you will, right, of about $770,000. That is now coming off the books. We don't get that every year. We did have some increases in our reimbursable aids. It's like transportation, for example, there's a few of those. In the end, the state gave us a total of less than $23,000 that we got last year. So when you take a look at those total numbers, yes, we got a foundation increase. It is not nearly what our neighbors got, right? Double-digit increases throughout, right? The county, we know that. We're not the only one getting a 3%, but the vast majority getting more than 3%. On top of the aid reduction that we're seeing, small increases with reimbursable leads you to getting, we'll call it $20,000 less in state aid. So obviously we have a deficit, right? How do we close that? Well, we have two main funding sources. One is the state aid, and the other is on the backs of our taxpayers, the local levy. So we really have two options. Option one, we could go to a tax levy of approximately 7%, and with that, we could keep existing programs. That number is higher than our tax cap, higher than we've gone out with in many, many, many years, and that number would require a supermajority, right, because it's higher than the cap, so you need 60% of the residents to vote yes on that. Or you do number two, which is a tax cap, and you make reductions. Go to the cap. You're not going to close that gap, that deficit, so you need to do it through making reductions. It is the strong recommendation of the cabinet to go to the tax levy and not to pierce it, not to try to go to that 7%, but to stay at the levy. We talked about that and the work Carrie has done to try and flatten that out. If you look at last year, this year, and next year, so we're kind of keeping that in the 2 nines as we try and navigate capital project type tax cap calculation complexities. So we're looking at that number there, bringing in that revenue of what we'll call about $1 million in revenue. In the end, here's the specific numbers. We'd have an expense budget of 66.2, a revenue stream of, we'll call 65,000 or 65 million, and there's your deficit of about $1.3 million that we'd have to cut. That revenue number has in it that $1 million. So the gap is with that revenue going out at the cap. We would have to cut $1.3 million. Excuse me. So how do we do that? We thought we'd break it down for you again by level. We thought that was the easiest way to do it. Let you know the quantity. So we're going to talk a lot about the term FTE, that's full-time equivalent. 1 is 1, right? It's a full-time teacher. So there's your 3 positions at the elementary level. 1 is a classroom teacher. That is through attrition. No impact. That's enrollment driven, right? So there's no need based on our class size to have that person filled. 2 elementary positions in AIS, that's Academic Intervention Services. 1 would be through attrition. 1 would be through a straight layoff. What is the impact? Well, it's a decreased services for our struggling learners, right? As we're going to talk about in an upcoming slide, we spent the vast majority of our stimulus money on people, largely teachers, largely AIS, right? We knew when we got the stimulus money that this was going to run out. We knew we were going to have to cut that. This is where the rubber is meeting the road on our intervention services. Doesn't make it any better. We know that we've built a really strong system. We have data to show that it is working, but we can't afford it. At the middle school, the cut's about 4, or is 4, right? And some of these are split, so you have a PE 0.5. You see that coming up at the high school slide as well. AIS math. I'll go back to the PE 1. That's going to result in larger class sizes and decreased options for students. The concern there, of course, would be larger PE sizes, less supervision, more behavior type issues, as well as decreased options. Our PE department at both the middle school and high school has done a really nice job of creating strands which give kids options in PE. And we can go through some of the evidence that we have that works, right? Kids are engaged in it. When kids are playing, when they're taking the strand that is of interest to them, they often do better in that area, right? We have examples of kids who have not done well in one strand and done well in another, right? And so there's an impact there. AIS math, going back to the last slide, again, you're going to see that over and again. That's decreased services. In this case, is at the middle school in our math department. The world language elective, that is a 1.0. Talking about the loss of exposure there to world cultures. That's that 6th grade course that really exposes kids to both Spanish and French. Excuse me, and a loss of informed choice before choosing a language. That's something we started to provide that so students were making informed choice. Rob wanted to point out to me that I started that. I said, well, thanks for making me feel worse. But that is a lack of informed choice as we try to make that a better option for students. At the middle school, also we have the tech integration and social studies elective. The tech integration part is really tech support for faculty. It's a teacher, sort of an assignment, we'll call it, for part of their day that really does a lot of professional development type work with the staff at the middle school. Also does a lot of work kind of on building culture and those type of presentations. You've seen like the warrior assemblies they do, an integral part of that, as well as the loss of the elective to support the global civic awareness. So that 8th grade elective really is an exposure to cultures as well, and exposure to the global civic awareness standards. And then of course we have another math, so that is a separate math. That's 1.5 total AIS math at the middle school, at the reduction. At the high school, part of that PE that you saw in the middle school slide and part of that math one, same issues there. Science is a retirement that'll result directly in a loss of electives. And then with one teacher aide that we don't foresee an impact on because it's IEP driven. It is important, I think, to note, as we talked about these numbers over the last few presentations, the high school has recently reduced in social studies and in English. So while 3 is bad, if you combine it with the last couple of years, it's really sort of like 5, right? Because we've been trying to reduce where possible. And those reductions have led to less electives at the high school. We have one District 1 SEL coach, also through attrition. And that's really where you're talking about the lack of a consistent and deliberate and purposeful SEL support across all of our schools that was providing, as we've talked about many times, the needs are increasing. Not a good time to decrease the support or the services that we're providing or support that we're providing both to faculty and to staff and to students, not ideal. So we look at it there. I want a couple notes providing some information as we went through this. It is a total of 11 FTE in reductions. We do have a hiring of 4 FTE in special education. So the net, just to be fair and honest, to make sure we're trying to be as transparent as possible, is a reduction of 7 total. The next bullet doesn't make it any easier, but when you looked at all those reductions, those 11, one is a layoff that was not foreseen. And by that we mean all the other reductions were either through attrition or they were positions that were temporary, and the people in those positions were well aware when they took those positions that they were stimulus funded. So again, doesn't make it any better, but something we wanted to make sure that we're communicating. We also have some other cuts we talked a little bit about. There was sort of major stuff. We wanted to highlight these because they were having an impact on students. We're freezing our budget line on extracurricular clubs and activities. It has increased over time, right? So if you go to 17, 18 when I started up until 22, 23, definitely an increase, and that's been deliberate and has been a positive for students, directly in line with goal number 2. So we're going to freeze that number essentially at the 111,000 amount. That will result, excuse me, that will result in less clubs, right? Because we have clubs right now that are in the first year that are free pilots. There's no advisor for it, no payment to the advisor. So those clubs either need to be funded or go away. In addition, there's contractual raises, so that means there's less money to be used on the same number of positions, essentially. So that will result in a decrease in clubs, but the budget line itself is relatively frozen. Athletics is going to cut JV competitive cheer, and they're also going through some budget line reductions on some things there with transportation and uniforms and supplies, if I remember correctly. We've talked a lot about the AIS impact. We wanted to show you this slide. It's a little bit simpler. All right, IS is intervention specialist. So if you look at that, just kind of a 5-year review of where we've been the last 2 years, where we are right now, what we're projecting for next year, and where we see ourselves being a year out from now. So really, if you focus on 22, 23, there's a total there of 11.5, and next year that would be 7. So it is a decrease of 4.5 in terms of the AIS support that we're providing our students. Noted in there that before the stimulus money came, 21, 22 was going to be 8.5, and you can see 21, 22 ended up being 13.5. So we use the stimulus money to fund those positions, rightfully so. We'll be about where we ended up thinking we would be as we projected this out. We talked also about the last column. That right there is 24 to 25. It's a further reduction, so from 9 to 6 and 6 to 3. But it is important to note that those positions are not currently in the general fund, right? In an effort to make this more streamlined, more transparent, and easier as we go through this, we wanted to take positions out that were not required, so that when we were trying to bring them back in next year, it was a little simpler as we deal with attrition and we deal with cuts to say, okay, if we want to bring them in, what's going to go out? So that is, for all intent and purposes, more of an accounting issue, but it is important to note that those positions are not in the general fund projection for next year. So when we talk about a rollover budget, Carrie and I, she's been doing it a lot longer than the 2 years I did it, but we use the term modified rollover because it's not truly a rollover, because you have increases you have to factor in with, contractual raises, you have breakage from people are leaving, you have different things. So it's not truly a rollover, but in that modified rollover, we go to it next year, those AIS positions will not be in it. So I just want to make sure we were informing you that.
Can you go back for a second?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
The AIS positions that we're losing from 23, 24 to 24, 25, those are not in the general fund, or are they all not in the general fund?
So for 23, 24, under this plan, we'd have the 6 AIS teachers.
Right.
For next year, we'd have 3. That's our hope.
Right.
It's not, it's simply based on having 1 per building.
Right.
We know we're gonna have to cut from 6 to 3, most likely, but we're pointing out that those 3 themselves are still not in the general fund.
That's what I want.
So really, it's 0 in the general fund.
Okay.
Now, I don't think anyone thinks that we should have 0 at the elementary next year, so we're gonna have to find a way to bring them in, right? We have ideas with attrition and some things, but until they're real, they're not real, right? And that kind of goes back, so it's a kind of a good segue. When we did this, we had a plan of who was being paid for by stimulus and how to possibly bring them in. Again, all plans last until the next day, basically, right? Because things happen, health issues, retirements, things are constantly changing, and you're bringing people in, you're bringing people out. So that it's kind of a moving target. But I think to answer your question, yeah, officially, we would be down to 0 next year.
Okay, in the general.
In the general fund, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. The budget-to-budget increase, so just kind of going back a little bit higher level now, if you're forgetting everything else, 22, 23 to 23, 24, the budget itself is going up $1 million, a little over. That's a 1.63% increase in the entire budget. So that's the year-to-year budget increase. And we're doing it with no increase in the use of reserves or fund balance. That was on one of the slides that Carrie had showed. We are using reserves and fund balance, but we're not increasing our use or our reliance on those 2 funding streams. Just like at home, if you're using up your savings to meet your regular bills, eventually you're going to run out of your savings, right? So we're trying not to use that. That money is used for a variety of things, like when you have a flood that costs, $2 million, and you have to pay for it. So we do have that money as a reserve, and that's for a good reason. So if you're looking beyond 23, 24, Just again, stimulus funding will end. There's two streams. Stream number one is ending after this year. Stream number two would end after next. So we need to move positions and programs from stimulus, right? That's your AIS teachers. We have a bunch of stuff in there, right? And we can go through a whole list. The pilot program we have at the Start Center to provide trauma counseling is in the stimulus money. We just talked to them last week before and said, we're good for another year. We knew we had them this year. Pilot's going really well, we think. Want to continue to build on it. It's in the budget for next year. It's in the budget of stimulus money. I said to the director there, so you got us for one more year. I can't guarantee anything beyond that. So there's programs like that that are in stimulus. Some are summer school. There's a bunch of things that are kind of in there. Those programs are, that money is going to go away. So you have positions that we need to move in, you have programs that we need to move in. And not to be even more doom and gloom, but we are fairly certain that our stated increases are going to be minimal going forward. Again, remember the main talking point, and it's accurate, the state has fully funded foundation aid, something that's been promised forever. They're doing, it's led to a windfall of money. Schools are getting significant increases, many cases double-digit increases. The kind of projections we've seen from the state has been, okay, you're fully funded now. Don't expect much after this. So I think everyone will be in that 3-ish%. If I had to project or guess going forward, they'll be more like where we are now. We're unfortunately getting there earlier. Next steps, projected to have an adoption. That's on the 17th. You legally have to adopt. Carrie may note offhand, it's a little bit later in that week, right? 21st, I believe, yeah. Then you have the hearing on the 8th, and then the budget vote is on the 16th of May. And that's your review of the budget presentation to kick off your discussion. Our ask would be that you are in position to give us the green light to adopt next meeting. That's the next deadline that we have to hit. So.
I don't want to overstate. I feel like maybe I'm missing something, but in order to get rid of that funding gap, you explained that to be the loss of those total of 7 FTEs. Is that correct? There was nothing other than, and the freezing of the club budgets.
Well, we did do.
That was able to get rid of that, or to minimize the funding gap.
We did do, and Carrie, jump in anytime, you're much more in tune with this than I am. We did do a lot of budget line increase. What we tried to do tonight was just provide you the bigger, right? So we didn't go line by line with it to say we cut this supply line from 20,000 to 10,000 or whatever. These are just the big ones to kind of keep it simpler. At this point, when you're talking that number, it's the old, you're not going to get there by going to double-sided copies, right? So Carrie spent a lot of time fine-tuning budget line by line. We went over this a million times. All right, can we squeeze more of this one? Can we squeeze more of this one? Can we squeeze more of this one? What if we bring this one? What if, and looking at past years and how do we get that smaller and smaller? I remember Michael always talking about you can keep doing that, but eventually you're getting to the point, again, just like at your house, if you're budgeting your home expenses to be 99.9% of your income, that's not such a good plan, right? So we have to budget and keep these lines in place, but we keep shrinking them and getting them smaller and smaller, which gives us less in case of utility type issues. That's why we had those increases to make sure in those big items we were able to keep what we needed to keep so that we don't have an issue going forward. But I think the short answer to your question is these are the big cuts, not every line by line of the cuts.
I just wanted, okay. I think when I saw that number, that million and something, I expected more. I expected to see more pain.
Mm-hmm.
Like, not that it wasn't painful, but I was like, I just expected more. So I'm almost relieved.
In a weird sort of way.
And yeah.
I'm not relieved, not even a little bit. I'm actually having a little trouble regulating my frustration, so I might need an SEL coach. So that the public can understand the situation here, the foundation aid formula, where a big chunk of our funding comes from, is based on criteria that was antiquated when they adopted it. And now it is even unfathomable. Is there, I was very encouraged by our conversation that we had with Scott. Our local elected representatives are very interested in helping out, but it needs to be broader, even in the research that I've been doing with regarding other districts who are being also underfunded. The math just doesn't make sense. So they're going to look at it, but there really just at this point needs to be public outcry for the way that schools are being funded. This is completely unacceptable. And my level of frustration is not with you, and it's not with anyone in the cabinet. Our district administration has been managing this and doing an amazing job for a very long time. But we are now coming to a point where there is no answer. Our community cannot sustain the level of tax increase that would be required to not have significant cuts. And there are other communities in the state, not even just locally, but in the state as a whole, that are facing similar situations. And we do not have time for them to figure this out. We don't have time. People will be impacted. Students will be impacted. People are losing their jobs. I can't be relieved. No, I can't.
Thanks. Jim, I want to thank you for that presentation. It was really clear. To summarize, it seems like our expenses have gone up a great deal. And so if we wanted to just provide the same level of staffing and programs that we had last year, plus the things that we have to fund by law or by previous agreement, we would need, based upon what the state gave us, we would need to raise taxes 7% at a time when money's really tight and inflation's running at, 5 to 6%. Correct. Depending on what your source is and what month you look at. But, so our community just can't absorb that. So I think your approach is just spot on, honestly, to say, well, we can do the 2+% tax cap and do that increase, and that will share the funding, and then we have to make cuts. And it's miserable, and I'm also completely frustrated by our state, where we're sitting here trying to figure out what cuts can we make for the students that tend to need it most, and we have data that shows what we're doing is effective. And I read an article in the Times-Union that says, no, where you really should focus on is that name warriors, because there's so much damage being done by that. So I'm without constructive words over the whole frustration thing, but I wanted to commend you on your presentation and also your approach. I think it's spot on. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have some notes here. I'm also really frustrated. It's definitely not. I mean, there was at one point where we thought it was gonna be worse than that, and so over the moon. I'm impressed with what you guys are able to do. But I said this before. that, it just, like Adam said, like it seems to be falling on the back of the kids that need the most. And when it's juxtaposed with the accountability report, like how long do we stay in that LSI if we don't have, AIS services for the kids, and that's, I tend to be an optimist and I tend to be a problem solver. And so if somebody from the SED said, raise your hand if you want to be on the committee to reformulate the formula, I'd be like, okay, sign me up, and I'll bring a calculator and have Carrie feed that. And so like the optimist in me is like, that can be done. And maybe in 10 years, they'll come up with something and then it'll be outdated the moment they release it. But that the thing that concerns me the most really is, how much intervention services that we're losing. And I know that like we are, like this is what you guys have put together to like ease the pain is fantastic. It's like, it's great. And kudos. And, if there's anything that we can do as a body to sort of facilitate, other ways of intervention that don't involve FTE, a volunteer squad. I don't even know, like tutoring. I don't even know what goes into it on the ground day to day, but that's my biggest concern, right, is the kids who need it most. And then, I go to the data, right? Like if we have this percent of FTE reduction, does that track with the percent enrollment decline? Does that track with the percent of aid decline, or is it out of whack? And again, it's nothing that we can do about it, but that's where my mind goes to, is, from what I've seen, the formula certainly does not take that kind of nuance into account, and it's unfortunate. So, like Adam said, kudos to you guys for softening the blow. And I hope that we can find, if any crowd can find creative ways to ease the blow on the ground day to day for the kids, it's you guys. So that's it.
Just a quick comment from me. I'm 17 and I obviously don't have a college degree in accounting or reading a spreadsheet or anything like that. But Dr. Franchini, your presentation was clear enough that I'm pretty much able to understand the situation that exists here. So thank you for that. I feel like I know what's going on. And it really just seems like, from a school standpoint, our hands are tied based on, the rising cost of inflation, that it's more expensive to facilitate a school, but, we're not getting the money from the state to offset that. It's really unfortunate. I can see that from here. A quick question, because I've gone through, all of the process of learning here, and being able to choose the language that I took, I think it was in 6th grade, was pretty important. So I just want to know if there's going to be anything in the process that is going to be altered so that students can still make a good decision despite not having all of the trials and tribulations that I had a few years ago.
Yeah, that's a good question. We haven't really gone to that level. I think we probably have to go to something what we used to do prior to that, which was having some kind of like sample lesson, go down, talk about it type of thing. Not nearly as good as what we're doing now, obviously. So.
That answer your question, okay?
Yeah. I just have one.
Yeah, of course.
I agree with Megan. I'm not relieved because we really haven't seen or felt the impact yet. It's yet to come. And when you talk about limiting student options in one of the slides, and yeah, it was in PE, I think it was, but even less than that in terms of choosing classes, having more options,
The electives.
options and electives, yes, thanks. We haven't felt that yet. Wait till you start to feel it about why are our kids wearing those old uniforms? And it could be a couple of years down the road, you're gonna hear that. Why is this happening? How come the kids can't go in the weight room now when they take PE anymore? Because we don't have a person in there to monitor them. So there's so many of those things that are going to take place next year that don't give me any solace at this point. And I don't even want to itemize them. I don't think you want to itemize them at this point because that'll be an ongoing process next year. But that's what we're facing. And it's going to be insidious because it's going to permeate almost everything we do. I don't care if it's transportation, sports, academics, administration. It's going to affect all of those areas. So, okay, let's move on.
No, I agree. I also think we can't ask the voters to go above the tax levy cap and we have been getting the 60% approval mark, but that's at the tax levy cap. If we go above it, not only are we going to not pass the budget, which could put us in a worse situation than this, it's also going to vote down our bus proposition, which we've had, it's taken us I don't know, since I've been on the board, it's taken the majority of that time, at least 10 years, to get to a 10-year replacement plan, because we've had bus propositions go down, and then that just expanded it. We were on a 7-year replacement plan. We had 2 years where when bus proposition went down, we're not able to replace our buses on a measured pace, so that there is this less, as Ann pointed out, or Megan, I forget who, there's this measured less impact on an annual basis from the bus proposition. So that goes down, and then we have this reserve go down. There's so many negative effects programmatically that I agree, there's a lot of effects here that we're not seeing yet. It's gonna be worse if the budget goes down, so I feel like we're stuck. We're really stuck in this awful place, and this deficit that we have is terrible. But I do not think we would get the 60% needed to go over the tax, and especially at the rate of 7%. I don't think it will happen. So I think we'd have to stay within those parameters. Do you have more, Megan?
I was just gonna say, it's not even just this year that I'm worried about, because if something doesn't change fundamentally at the state level, this just will continue to get worse. And this is bad enough. This is awful. So that next year and the year after, if there is not a fundamental change at the state level, if they do not move on this in an expeditious manner, this only gets worse from here, and the impact gets excessive. It just compounds on top of it.
And how do we make that matter though? Because how do we get, like, who pointed out, Adam pointed out, we're talking about the Warriors' name. We were talking, the news that was reported, oh, Averill Park, they didn't give the kids a snow day, they went to remote learning. That was the news. It's not the news that this is going to be, this never is hitting the news, and I don't even understand that part either. So how do we get it to even be on people's radar screen? Because the public, I don't think the public understands this because nobody's reporting on it. How do we do that?
I feel like it needs to be out there, editorialized. It needs to be spoken about. We need to provide talking points to the public. We need to invite other districts in the same boat as us to participate with us. We need to go knocking on the representatives' doors, and we need to, bring the children that are going to be affected. this is not okay. It hasn't been okay for a really long time. They had the audacity to acknowledge it pre-COVID and then just swept it right under the rug. And it didn't get addressed. And if people don't get loud, it will never get addressed. I mean, the article in the paper that really bothered me was the Board of Regents acknowledging that the Regent scores have gone down, and their answer to addressing the Regent scores going down is to just lower the bar. What is that? There is an apathy towards the children of this state and the children of our community, and the state has decided that our children don't deserve a quality education. It's unacceptable. It's completely unacceptable. And if we don't, as a community, and as a community at large, and the neighboring communities don't stand up and say something, nothing ever changes, and it only gets worse. And how much worse does it need to get? Because the children impacted are the children getting extra services. Some of those kids could, by all rights, qualify for an IEP. I don't think people realize how hard it is to get your child classified with a diagnosis, to get them the IEP, to get them the services that are required by law. I don't think people realize how difficult that is. So the students that are getting swept under the rug, they need those services. They can't afford to give up those services. They shouldn't have to give up the right to choose a language.
There's just a couple of technical questions.
So no, not all of them are. There are over 200 districts in this state getting the shaft just like us. No, East Greenbush is not going to speak up on our behalf because they're getting double digits. It's the districts that are in the hold harmless. I was looking at the report. Thank you, Carrie, for sending that to me because I appreciate it. There are districts in that report getting $5,800 in additional aid for next year. What? Total. What reasonable, intelligent human being looks at that formula and thinks that that's acceptable or appropriate? Where is that acceptable? To put a price tag on a child's education and think that that's acceptable. That is not acceptable.
I think we agree. I think there's a couple things going on here. We obviously need to figure out how to advocate with the state. And that is sort of separate than what our budget is adoption, what we're going to put out to the voters is. And so we need to figure that out. I don't know, we need to really think about how to get together a community group to do the advocating. And then we also need to figure out what are we going to adopt next time too. So I think they're two separate issues. So, yeah.
At this point.
You are correct.
Right. At this point, because like you said, we're too late.
Well, and my outrage on the state issue doesn't mean that I would not support the administration's request for, I can put that on the mic so that anyone who needs to hear me say it can hear me say it. Obviously, I support the administration and the cabinet. I find us in an impossible situation, asking the community to make an impossible choice. That doesn't mean that I won't support what I think we can go forward with, but it doesn't stop there.
Right, exactly.
Well, so that was my question, is that like, again, to like be this, maybe it's like naive, but even something like taking the hold harmless and never mind the formula, lost cost. Taking the hold harmless and tying it to inflation. What does that mean in numbers? What was that like if that had been the case this year? What would that have meant in numbers?
It's about another $1 million, give or take. If you say 3% was 520, you're just multiplying it by 3 to get to 9.
So we still
Just
have,
ballparking it.
So we'd have a
still have a deficit
Deficit,
of
right.
300,000,
but
but
no,
not 1.3
not
million.
1.3 million. So it would not be an insignificant benefit if it was, it wouldn't nearly be as drastic, but we would correct, you know. We certainly wouldn't be looking at asking 7% of the taxpayers, which I'm personally not willing to do. Okay, so I mean, so going forward, anybody who's like, you know, my goal would be to, you know, get this passed in all its dignity and work towards something like that, because it does sound like that, like you're not getting into foundation formula. I mean, Carrie tried to explain it to me, and it was like 10 minutes, and my eyes like rolled back in my head. So, it's really bonkers. But so, I mean, that would be my take. That would be my take, is to swallow hard and get this done, and then really try and advocate over the next year or two to even get something as simple as like, just tie it to inflation. It doesn't have to be more complicated than that, and that would make some kind of difference. Or does that bite us, if inflation starts going down, does that bite us in the rear end? I don't know.
Well, if inflation goes down, then hopefully our utilities expenses and the.
Right.
Nibble.
Does the board have any other questions in regards to what has been presented over this meeting, the last several meetings, in regards to what the recommendation is for this budget adoption?
Are we going to get a more deep, maybe we've already had it, and I haven't looked line to line, more detailed impact statement?
Yeah, I think we sent the detailed out after last meeting.
Was it?
Yeah.
I mean, really line,
Yeah, I think it was, you sent that out. My dates are all blending now.
Yeah, I just know it was the second snow day, so it was shortly after the last.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've got to go back to that. Is that something that we should bring out to the public more? In other words, very specifically, that these are going to be some of the impacts that you will see immediately next year.
Yeah, that's what.
Yeah, I know, but.
We can get the line by line, the budget corner.
Yeah, we need to put that into some kind of a format that can go in the advertiser, that a reporter can grab a hold of it and just take without a lot of verbiage and a lot of simpler format.
I would think a line by line is much more complicated, and
Right.
the way that Jim presented it tonight would be a simpler format.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, you can really get bogged down in the line by line. I mean, it should absolutely be available for information purposes, but if you want to educate people, I think the way that it was presented tonight, in groups of, this is utilities, this is retirement, these are contractual obligations, identifying those pockets of money, I think is a simpler way to see where the deficits lie. But absolutely, you should have the detailed budgets to support that. But I think, I don't know, perhaps your everyday citizen would not be interested. Not to say nobody would be, but I think that overall, it's more meaningful to know the pockets of money and where the deficits lie. And but also, like, he outlined that, but he also outlined, you know, what impacts we're gonna have in terms of AIS math, in terms of the elective at the high school, in terms of the PE teachers, in terms of the loss of the sixth grade world languages. Those were identified as well. So you're able to identify those impacts as well, in terms of knowing, like you say, where the impacts are gonna be. Where you're gonna feel that next year. It's important for us as well as anybody who wants to know, to see the line by line, but I think this is a lot, the way it's presented to us is a lot clearer.
It is. And I'm getting too much in the weeds, and I don't mean to do that. But
I
you've
understand where
taken,
it comes from, though, because I went down that rabbit hole and you can definitely get a
it can
little
get too
overwhelming.
deep.
Yeah.
You've also made efficiencies over the last couple of years. And, you know, again, nickel diming it here and there is, I guess, not the solution, but you, just to let the public know, that big public that's listening out there, is that, you know, you're replacing fluorescent lights with LED lights in both indoors and outdoors. You're making so many other efficiencies in terms of use of our personnel, our maintenance and grounds personnel. You've done a lot to minimize the increases already.
Right.
You're going to have to do a lot more, I guess, but it's not something that we haven't fattened the hog over the last couple of years, and now we have to kill it and trim it down.
Yeah.
No, it's not gonna work that way, because we've already did some carving. That's a gross way to put it.
Yeah, I'm hungry all of a sudden.
Exactly.
That's farming. It's
And so all these presentations over the past several meetings are on the budget corner.
There, yeah, that's how I just.
And then tonight's will be there too, as well as the line by line that Carrie shared, that's up there or will be up there,
It's not up there yet, we get up there tomorrow.
the public to.
Yeah, well, we typically show that after the board's adopted it,
Adopted,
instead of putting out multiple versions of the line by line, but we're required to, part of the budget documents that we share.
Right, right.
Thank you.
But so as far as we're concerned, we have our questions answered. So between this meeting and the meeting on the 17th of April is our next meeting. That's when we have to adopt the budget by. So if there's questions from the board, email Jim. Okay. And then we can talk about them the next time in public, but just so he has the answers prepared or.
And again, our role is just to approve the number,
The
not
number.
the detail below it.
Correct.
Thanks.
Correct. Thank you. That's a nice point to make.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, things that is. Okay, we actually, in item number 11, have some policy items. So the first is to approve the revised policy, or it's not to approve it, it's the second reading of policy 5405, which we made some revisions to. So, Ann. Yeah, you can make a motion to do what you people think.
I just want to get it over.
So your motion is?
My motion is to waive a third reading and adopt the policy as written.
Okay. Besides that, okay, so.
As
Ann
someone
makes-
not on the policy committee, I'll say.
Thank you. Ann makes a motion to approve the policy as it is presented tonight. Megan seconds. Discussion. And you had a bunch of questions last time, which the policy committee did sit together and we did a few modifications based on your comments.
Yeah, I'm still deciding, honestly. So you guys on the policy committee and as a board, we're in this tough middle ground where we know when it comes to policies, the more conditions or restrictions we put upon ourselves, the higher we make that bar that then we are obligated to achieve. And so there's a natural tendency, knowing this, to say, let's make sure the bar is low enough so that we have the freedom to put it wherever we want.
Go ahead,
And
finish.
at the same time, you also want to set the bar high enough where it's a place of excellence, sort of. And I read it a couple times and I'm still trying to figure out if we have the right language in there that motivates us to, doesn't obligate us, but motivates us to put the bar where I think it should be, so.
So I think by keeping it simpler is maybe, and I can understand where you're coming from, but I see it sitting on the policy committee and reviewing these policies closely as making sure the people who need to implement the policies have the flexibility they need to be able to implement them in a way that's, well, as we talked about just a few minutes ago, Doug said there's efficiencies, and the policies need to be able to provide that so we don't put more on their plates that are already overflowing. So,
Yeah,
so that's how I view it, is a little spin on what you said. Yes, we want it to be sort of less restrictive, maintain the quality, but how do we do it so they have the flexibility on implementation?
Yeah, just to kind of piggyback a little bit on the implementation side. For the policies, at least my understanding of it, is you have the policy and then you have the regulation, which is the implementation of that policy. And then you may or may not have exhibits, which might be like a letter that you would send home or something like that. So we as a board are not responsible for the regulations and the exhibits. We're responsible for the policies. So it just kind of piggybacks a little bit on what Jesse is saying in terms of allowing within the realm of excellence, which is something that I think we all agree on and I'll try to attain. We also need to maintain that flexibility within the rule of law, you know, in terms of federal law, state laws and all that, and the wording that they're giving us. All of this is run through NISBA to make sure that we're meeting those criteria as well. So it is definitely a balance, but I see it as also a way to provide the flexibility and guidance for those regulations to be implemented. So we don't want to put those regulations as part of the policy, is what I'm saying. Does that make sense? Because it's not our position to tell them how to implement what we want them to do.
Right, you're not specifying the regulations, but you're referring to them.
Right, because they're separate and they're not something that we as a board are responsible for.
Yep, I got it.
I think I made it worse.
So from my perspective, and I appreciate the latitude to continue the discussion because perspective is kind of an evolutionary process. I say that a lot. The way I understand it in how I'm able to wrap my head around, you know, sometimes what may come across as a vague sort of, you know, policy, and I think that's kind of what you're getting at, is it's kind of vague, it doesn't stipulate those standards. When we're talking about the you know, public perception of what qualifies as, you know, wellness or what have you, honestly, those standards change on a fairly fluid basis. I like the latitude in the policy because I think it gives the individuals that we entrust with implementing these things the ability to be aware of those things and go above and beyond, as they so frequently do. Whereas if we put a stipulation in writing on a particular standard, or if we get specific with it, that almost prevents them from going beyond it. It's not even a matter of setting the bar too low. If you're setting the bar at a particular level, going past that bar also then is not allowed. It is the bar. So you have to come up to it, you can't go past it. So leaving that measure of vagueness in there gives them the ability to strive for the highest point within our ability to do so. So that's why I was moving to go on with it as revised based on our last conversation. That's an explanation of my perspective.
Thank you.
The only thing was when you put it in a frame of like raising or lowering the bar, I would say like to come out of that framework and that we are setting the bar with other language in a broad sense. I don't think that anybody kind of out there could come to us and be like, we don't think you guys really value, you know, wellness, physical wellness, you know, good nutritional standards. We don't really get that vibe. So like, you know, there's a number of, I sort of, okay, I'm into work, I had it in here. Because I was looking at, but they don't involve specific parameters, right? But they are sentences that clearly convey that, you know, like, reasonably portioned diet, well-balanced, nutritious, essential for student wellness. We are saying that our values, part of our values for student wellness are these things, right? And our student wellness is part and parcel of student achievement, right? That's in there. And so we've said those things that you want, we've set the bar high in a broad sense in those sentences, and then it's the obligation versus like the constraint, right? So yet we don't want to obligate them to stuff that might change, and we don't want to constrain the staff in their ability to get creative if need be. And so that's where I look at, you know, they're less constrained and able to, in their ability to enact day after day that, you know, these values that we are putting forward. The district shall ensure that all foods promote good nutrition, balance, etc. So we're saying this is our expectation. And I don't think that, you know, I think that there's enough in there that no one's gonna come up and say, catch up, here's your vegetable. Have a nice day. Good luck. That's fine, you know. So it's, I hear you, I'm like, we don't wanna lower the bar, and I think the bar is in there. And so, yeah. The breakfast bar, if you will. You know,
Do you have specific questions or specific?
There's just one, let me find it.
Okay, there you go. Because that might help us too, if there's, you know, we went through your comments, like I said.
My exhaustive
And we, yeah, the ones we had the last time that we discussed through.
So in section 6, monitoring review, I brought this up before. The language is that the wellness co-coordinators will report every 3 years to the board and the public.
Mm-hmm.
Can we say at least every 3 years?
So the 3 years was the new regulation, I think it's federal regulation, yeah.
That's tied to the regulation that we can't change, right?
Yes, so that's the
Okay.
federal,
3 years.
the federal regulation says this assessment must take place once every 3 years. And that's federal regulation, so that's why we
So
left it as is.
we're not
because
allowed
it's-
to do it more frequently?
So we certainly could, and if, I mean, if the board agrees to add that language,
What I'm
at
saying is,
least every 3 years is what you're
if
saying.
you say every 3 years, then it's every 3 years. If you say every 3 years, maybe it's every 3 years, maybe it's other, there's a little more flexibility there. It's a little more aspirational. So I'm not looking to tie our hands or remove the flexibility, looking to add the aspiration.
So I guess I would pull the board on changing that from the draft you guys have right now and see what you guys would be interested.
I feel like it's a little bit tomato on it. I guess I'm not understanding, because just because it says every 3 years doesn't mean that they couldn't do it if the need presented itself. It just means that from a regulatory perspective, we have to provide the accountability every 3 years. But to say at least, you want to include at least every 3 years, I don't see how that changes it. Am I misunderstanding?
Because we're not saying they can't do it more. We're just saying, it's already implied, I think. And I would think,
When I read it, it was implied that it's 3 years. It's not more, it's not less, it's 3.
But I don't understand how adding the at least in there changes that.
Gives
Well,
you,
okay, sorry. I mean, I think it's like if someone said, okay, let's just do it, we'll do it this year, we'll skip a year, and we'll do it the next year, we'll just do it every other year. Does this allow for that?
right, if I say, how much does this cost? It's $100. Wow, that's too much. But if I say, well, it's gonna be at least $100, that's a really bad analogy. To wind that one back in.
Jesse?
yeah, you're saying the
Jesse?
same thing.
Yeah.
No, it's a bad example.
I have the email open from NISBA, so we did run all your questions by NISBA. It says here, the board is free to require assessments more frequently, but the draft policy reflects the requirements of federal regulations. So I interpret that as you guys have the option to, if you want to call the co-coordinators in and say, hey, we'd like a report. The way she worded it, I believe you have the option to do that.
And that's how it stands
Right,
right
and
now.
that's-
We have the option to do it as the language is crafted.
The way I interpret Jessica's email to us, yes.
Okay, so the wording as it is right now allows the flexibility that you're looking for.
Okay.
Okay, that's confirmed.
It's good. And this is what the email from Jessica Goldstein from NISBA is stating, because we did ask that question of her. So you guys do have freedom to require it more frequently. It says bar draft policy reflects the requirements of federal regulations. So.
If we add at least, it's not gonna really, we can still do it every 3 years if it comes to that, but I don't think there's any harm in adding at least every 3 years.
Right. And so where would that be?
It would just be at least every 3 years, the district wellness coordinators.
I mean, it's fine with me because I don't hear a difference, so fine, no problem.
Well, there's a small
so there's-
intricacy there that
Yeah, there
indicates that there's,
That we're paying attention.
yeah.
Like it's up to 3 years,
Yeah,
that's what
yeah.
I'm trying to.
Okay.
So it's in there twice, in that paragraph twice. So do we just want to put it in the first sentence that the district with, coordinators shall report at least every 3 years to the board and the public on the implementation and effectiveness of this policy. And then it says every 3 years, the co-coordinators in consultation, blah, blah, blah.
I'm not even sure you need that, because it's part of what they're telling
It
you.
is part of it, yeah, so I think we should put, shall report at least every 3 years. And then we just take out every 3 years in the second sentence and said the district wellness co-coordinators in consultation, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Determine the extent the district schools are complying with this policy.
Parameters.
So we take the second every 3 years out at the beginning of that sentence and put shall report at least every 3 years. Does that make sense, Kim, do you got that? She's the. She gets all the edits down.
So at least every 3 years. I'm just pulling up the draft document.
Yeah.
Does that have to then go back to NISBA for
No,
approval or?
no,
Okay.
no. I think that's what Kim was saying, it's up to local control for the 3 years.
Okay.
And so if we confirm with Kim that she's making those changes, we can bring it up for vote.
We can read it back and say, we can make this with including the changes.
I think you also wanted to take out the start of the next sentence every 3 years.
Correct. Correct. So we're not saying every 3 years twice.
Okay, so then do we need to withdraw the motion on the floor? Because the motion on the floor was to discuss with the third reading and adopt as written, but we're making changes, so do we need to withdraw that motion?
Or do we have to?
I always get
Withdraw it?
lost in the
I-
motion thing.
Procedure,
I think you just do a motion.
we'll just do a motion.
You vote.
So,
I'm not
yes.
making any motions.
Okay, I'll make a motion, I'll make a motion to waive the third reading and adopt the regulations.
The policy.
Adopt the policy with the changes as discussed herein.
I will second that.
Okay,
Do you want me to say it in a second?
all right, so do you just want to read that back? Those, just the first sentence and the start of the second sentence?
We have the district physical wellness co-coordinator shall report at least every 3 years to the board and the public on the implementation and effectiveness of this policy. The district physical wellness co-coordinators, in consultation with appropriate personnel and advisory committees, shall monitor and review the district's physical wellness activities to determine the extent that district schools are complying with this policy, how this policy compares to model wellness policies, and the progress made toward attaining the goals of increasing student physical wellness and decreasing childhood obesity in the district. Based on those results, this policy may be revised as needed. Does that capture?
I think that's fine.
I think that.
Yeah.
That, okay.
I'm good.
All right, good. So we'll call it to a vote. All those in favor of approving it with the edit? It passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay, so with that, we need to, another motion to rescind the current policy, which is actually a different number, 5425, so we don't have two conflicting policies. Adam makes a motion and Megan seconds to rescind policy 5425. Any discussion? All right, well, all those in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay. That was a tricky one, so that was a good policy to keep reviewing. Every once in a while we get those, so. That brings us to the second public comment session of the evening, and that can be on any topic. Is there any additional blue sheets? Okay, so we'll move right along to board member reports. David, do you want to start us off, please?
And I feel like I just witnessed history because I feel like that was probably how the writing of the Constitution went. Every little intricacy was broken down. So maybe in 200 years, there could be a case here whether or not at least was needed. I do notice a difference. I get it. Okay. First of all, it's been lost today because we've had so much going on, but just to reiterate, the congratulations to Mr. Engel. It was a great story on Channel 13. Our paths have crossed like 11 different times just because he does so much for the school. You can see him so many different places. He's, really unavoidable, but in a good way. He's everywhere. So he's the best, and I'm glad that that story did him some justice. You can't
say your paths across because you were also recognized on.
Yeah,
Gotta bring that back up.
That's true.
Well played.
Yeah, it was all a scheme. But for anybody who couldn't notice, I kind of lost my voice over the weekend, but I was at the Youth and Government Conference, which was at the Desmond Hotel and at the Capitol Building, and it's really a great experience. There was somewhere around 20 Averill Park students that went, which is a pretty significant number. And we mostly talked about things that are as boring as, the concepts that I'm talking about here, but very important. They're things that can seem kind of benign, very adult subjects, but are important.
You get your at least.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Learning all the intricacies of, in this case, bill writing, but also learning how to speak publicly, learning how to be a better leader, and just, advance society as the next generation. And it's really a worthwhile conference. I'm really lucky to be able to attend. We were visited by the Lieutenant Governor of New York State, Antonio Delgado, as well as U.S. Congressman Paul Tonko from the Albany district. So it's really, really, really worthwhile. And all of it is thanks to our advisor, father of an Averill Park student. To me, he's Alan, but I really should call him Mr. Alan Michaels. Just a great guy. He's a lawyer, incredibly smart, incredibly resourceful, very compassionate, connects with all the students really well. Goes the extra mile to make sure everybody has a good time, everybody gets something out of it. Make sure people stay with it and get all the benefits of the conference. So he's great. I can't thank him enough. He made it all happen, and we need more people like Alan Michaels because he's really great. He's helping us out. We have a DC trip next month. He's going to be the advisor for that as well. So he's like Mr. Engel. He's kind of everywhere. And then finally, this Saturday, we have the Mr. AP show, which I can speak to, and I know Ms. McGarry can as well because Ashlyn is a part of the committee. It's been a lot of work. I was after school today until almost 5 and then back here at 6:30. So it's been a lot, but hopefully it'll be worth it. It should be a great event. The whole community usually turns out. Anybody wanting to go, my act hopefully will be funny. We'll see. I've practiced it so many times that none of the jokes are hitting anymore. It's heard it like 12 times, like, yeah, we get it, okay? But hopefully they'll be funny to a new audience, but we'll see. But that's a big deal for the senior class. I think it's our biggest event, so we're hoping that goes well. But that's everything I had.
And you can get tickets at the door.
Tickets at the door. In the school, we're selling tickets now, but yeah, tickets at the door. There's a tailgate beforehand, bake sale. There's a lot of stuff going on. We're trying to make it as big an event as possible.
Excellent. Thank you. Adam?
So, want to congratulate Matt again on achieving tenure, well deserved. Thank you. Mr. Engel, you're the puppy guy, right? It's very dangerous to my family. Whenever my son comes home and talks about the number of puppies that came in, my wife and son look at me like, why don't we have 6 dozen dogs? What do we do? So it's awesome. You're a fixture in the community, so also very well deserved. Want to also give a shout out to the building and grounds crew that came in during Snowmageddon to just volunteer and help. That's great. You keep the trains running and it's part of the community. And then in return, the district opens up AMS so that people can come in and get some internet or some warmth or a hot meal, and that's fantastic. So we're all in it together. With the budget, I support what you guys are proposing. It's a miserable position we're in, but it's the least of two evils, I think. So I think we're doing the right thing there. And so I just want to thank you, Jim, Carrie, Matt, and the whole staff. Kim, I'm sure you were involved in some of this as well. So thank you for making tough decisions. It's just never easy. And that's what I got.
Great, thank you. Doug?
Jim, I just wanted to clarify one thing, and I know I should have asked this earlier, but I really have a quick answer for it. Capital Reserve Fund proposition. So this is the first step in that process, is that correct?
Yeah, tonight's approval allows us to put in a legal notice and then eventually go to the voters the day of the budget vote.
Go to the voters, so it's still yet to be.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. Other things, another very sad day for school districts, and that is there was another shooting in Nashville. 3 adults and 3 children killed. That just brings to mind the safety committee that we have in operation, which is very aggressive in terms of implementing safety issues. We also have a building project that's now underway that's going to reinforce our buildings and implement technology that would make, hopefully, the administration and others aware if there is a door that's propped open or something of that sort, at least cameras. And what I heard from news broadcast today is that that was the entry point. a side door for this individual perpetrated this today. So I hope we get all of that implemented as quickly as possible, both the entrances being reinforced and the technology that we need. That's all I have. I'd like to congratulate again Mr. Engel and Matt for your contributions to the school district and to our students. I think you're both doing an outstanding job. Thank you.
Thanks, Doug. Thank you. I want to once again thank Representative Assemblyman Bendet for coming in and speaking with us about the school funding situation and his willingness to step up on behalf of the community. He has historically always been a huge advocate for our district, and he continues to be, and we appreciate him. So thank you to Assemblyman Bendet. Can't really say enough. I am very much looking forward to Mr. AP. I think I've been tapped to bake something. Pretty sure that I got a memo somewhere from Ashlyn about making sure that there were enough baked goods. And I hope people come out and support that event, the tailgate beforehand and the show. I think it's gonna turn out really good. That event always sort of marks for me like the beginning of the end of the school year. It starts to come fast and furious, and we're, really starting to see the concert last week was incredible. It was so wonderful to see all of the choral kids from grades 6 through 12 get up there, and they sounded beautiful. Just really enjoying seeing our kids show up because they are so talented and exceptional, and they're really great. They're just always doing great things, so I'm really excited for that. Wanted to thank the schools that hosted blood drives. That is a personal thing for me, and want to just say how much I appreciate them stepping up to promote donation of blood and human blood products. As the mother of two children with blood disorders, one who's received multiple donations, I can tell you it has a very real impact on people, more so than you would think. So thank you for hosting those blood drives because they're very important to families like mine. I would like to congratulate our Odyssey of the Mind teams. That is another program that is just amazing, and I'm so excited for our AMS teams that are going to states. Get out there and kill it. And also would like to thank Mr. Engel. Congratulations on being recognized, not only for what they showed in the video, but also recently you and Mr. K accompanied some of our CTE students to an event to participate in that I thought was amazing. So thank you for everything that you're doing. It definitely is making a huge impact on the students of the school, and you're very much appreciated. Seeing you in here with us it's always nice to know that you're here taking care of us, you're taking care of the kids, you're really just putting in and going above and beyond. So thank you. And congratulations to Matt on your tenure. Couldn't vote yes for that fast enough. So congratulations to you as well, and thank you as well. Just lastly, I'm just going to circle back on the budget situation. If you're listening to this, please reach out if you're interested in participating with talking points or reaching out to elected representatives or participating with the community coalition to help us try to right the ship when it comes to school funding.
Thanks, Megan.
I did want to add, I got an email during the meeting, that's the high school team as well. Amy Miller sent me a summary. So the high school team is also going on, obviously. They just happened to have done a few weeks ago, so.
Well, congratulations to them also. The majority of that high school team are seniors.
That's the right.
And historically, if anybody's been following Odyssey of the Mind, have gone to states and even gone to Worlds. They are an amazing group of kids. So I'm so excited to hear that the high school team also made it to states. Thank you. Very nice. That's amazing.
Oh, I'm already on. Good thing I As you know, being at this end of the line, by the time it gets to us, there's not much more. So I don't have anything that hasn't been already addressed by my colleagues here, but thank you.
Thank you. Linda?
I could say the same things. The two things I just wanted to point out there in a second. Correct me if I'm wrong, but we've had those stop arm cameras in for, it's been about 3 weeks, maybe a month now-ish.
I lose track of time, yes.
Something like that. And so.
And they're being edited.
Yeah, it's just a stagger. And so that's something that, I'm eager to see that like do its thing. Especially as somebody who has the potential to walk to AMS with my student. Most of the time it feels safe, sometimes it does not. But we're giving it a go and wearing bright colors. But so school's still in session, so drive safely. Then the other thing I just wanted to point out, having been to the orchestra concerts and the jazz band and we're a musical family, and I just wanted to give a little kind of kudos to the music teachers, what they do. Like you see them in concert and what they get these kids. And again, like I know what my capability was at that age. It was not them. But beyond just what you see at the concerts, we get the schedule every week for when my daughter's lessons are going to be. And there's individual lessons and there's orchestra lessons, and now they're encouraging the students to do these recitals with NYSSMA, the New York State School Music Association. And it's quite challenging depending on what level they choose, and so the music teachers are also working individually with the kids who are stepping up, who want to be at that level. And there's just the number of sort of wheels that are spinning in the music department, plates on top of like the cat in the hat, right? I don't know how everyone's had to sort this, but I'm very impressed with what all the different balls that they can kind of keep in there, and then like the beautiful music that comes out of it. So I just wanted to give my appreciation to the work that they're doing behind the scenes. And over to you, Jensen.
All right. I'm with Ann. I think everything's been said. Everything's very important too. You can't lose sight of that. There's one thing that actually hasn't been mentioned, and I just want to give a shout out to the girls basketball team for their good run this season yet again. But their successes are contagious, and I think that community support that these teams bring out, like events like Mr. AP, but events like the girls basketball team, and especially playing so close, that it really brings the community out and to support our school community, which I think is so valuable too. So we appreciate the energy they bring to everybody. All right. I think Megan wants to end the meeting. No. So, yes, we are at that time, and Megan is making a motion to end the meeting, and Adam is seconding it. Yeah. Any discussion? All those in favor? All right, thank you, everyone. Have a good night.